The chapel had barely finished echoing with her disgrace when a voice, low, commanding, impossibly calm, cut through the courtyard. "Melissa Pablo." Not a question, a claim. Every whisper died, every head turned toward the black carriage and the man who should not have been there. Arthur Ashford, Duke of Blackmere, had come, and he was looking at her. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We did love to hear from you. If you enjoy Victorian-era tale stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. Melissa Pablo's hands trembled inside ivory lace gloves, the delicate fabric suddenly suffocating. Sunlight pierced through stained glass windows, casting rose and gold across the stone floor of St. Catherine's Chapel. A blessing that felt like mockery. Her heart hammered against her ribs, so loud she was certain the congregation could hear it over the organ's final notes. Lucas Butterfield stood beside her, close enough to touch, yet impossibly distant. His jaw was clenched, his gaze fixed on something beyond the altar, beyond her, beyond the life they were supposed to begin together. When the vicar cleared his throat and asked the question every bride waits to hear answered, Lucas inhaled sharply and stepped back. "I cannot," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent chapel. "I've been deceived." The word struck like a sharp object between her ribs. Gasps erupted from the pews. Sharp, delighted, horrified. Melissa's vision blurred at the edges as Lucas continued, each word carefully chosen, deliberately cruel. He spoke of her origins, of truths supposedly hidden, of a background that fell beneath the standards of his family name. He spoke as though she were not standing 3 feet away, as though her humanity could be erased by his discomfort. Melissa's mouth opened, but no sound came. What defense could survive this? What words could resurrect dignity already bleeding out on consecrated ground? The vicar shifted uncomfortably. Lucas's mother dabbed at dry eyes with a handkerchief. Someone in the back pews whispered loud enough to be heard. Poor girl. Did she really think... Melissa didn't hear the rest. 2 ushers appeared at her elbows, their touch gentle but insistent, guiding her toward the side door as though she were a problem to be quietly solved. The lace train of her dress, painstakingly sewn over 3 months, dragged across stone like a surrendered flag. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. Outside, the April air bit at her flushed cheeks. The courtyard was empty, save for servants pretending not to stare. Behind her, muffled voices continued inside the chapel. Lucas, no doubt, accepting condolences for his narrow escape. Melissa stood frozen on the cobblestones, alone in a wedding dress, mourning a future that had died before it began. Then she heard it. The distinctive sound of carriage wheels on stone, the snap of reins, the low, steady exhale of horses coming to a halt. She turned. A carriage stood 15 feet away, black lacquer gleaming, unmarked by crest or decoration, yet radiating an authority that needed no announcement, the kind of carriage that belonged to someone who never needed to prove their importance. Its door opened. A man stepped down with the unhurried grace of someone who had never been denied anything, yet carried that power without arrogance. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in charcoal and midnight. His face was all sharp angles and unreadable composure, the kind of face that revealed nothing unless he chose. His eyes found hers instantly. Dark, steady, knowing. Arthur Ashford, Duke of Blackmere, the man society whispered about, the recluse who declined invitations, ignored scandal, and answered to no one. The Duke who hadn't been seen at a public event in over 2 years. He was here. Now, looking directly at her. And then he spoke her name, not Miss Pablo, not the bride, not poor dear. Melissa Pablo. Her name, spoken with certainty, with recognition, as though he knew exactly who she was, not who Lucas claimed she was, not who society wanted her to be, but who she actually was. The whispers inside the chapel cut off abruptly. Faces appeared in windows. The ushers froze mid-step. Arthur Ashford stood between her and the wreckage of her wedding, his presence shifting the entire atmosphere without a single word of explanation. He extended his hand toward her, not in pity, not in rescue, but in acknowledgement. "You do not belong here," he said quietly, his voice carrying only to her. "Not like this." Melissa's breath caught. Her mind spun with 1,000 questions she couldn't form. Her legs trembled beneath layers of silk and ruined hope. But she understood this much. The Duke of Blackmere had just rewritten her story's ending, and it had only just begun. To understand how Melissa Pablo came to stand humiliated at an altar, only to be claimed by a duke she'd never spoken to, one must return to the beginning, to the lessons taught by a mother who believed endurance was love's price, and to the careful architecture of a life built on making herself small enough to be wanted. The courtyard air bit at Melissa's exposed skin, sharp enough to remind her she was still breathing, still standing, still here, despite wishing the cobblestones would swallow her whole. The Duke of Blackmere waited, his hand still extended, his expression unreadable. Behind her, the chapel door burst open. Lucas emerged, flanked by his mother and the vicar, their faces twisted with confusion and barely concealed outrage. "Your Grace," Lucas began, his voice tight with forced civility, "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. This woman—" "Miss Pablo," Arthur corrected, not bothering to turn. His voice was quiet, yet it cut through Lucas's words, like a sharp object through parchment. "Her name is Miss Pablo, and there is no misunderstanding." Lucas faltered. His mother's grip tightened on his arm. Arthur finally shifted his gaze from Melissa to the small crowd gathering in the chapel doorway. Guests pressed against windows. Servants lingered at corners, everyone desperate to witness what happened next. "I know who she is," Arthur continued, each word measured, deliberate. "I have known for quite some time." The silence that followed was absolute. Melissa's heart stuttered. Known her? They'd never spoken, never been introduced. The Duke of Blackmere moved in circles so far above her station they might as well have inhabited different worlds. "That's impossible," Lucas sputtered. "She's no one. Her family—" "Her father," Arthur interrupted, his tone dropping to something dangerous, "saved my life 8 years ago. A debt of that magnitude does not expire simply because society finds it inconvenient." Melissa's breath caught. Her father. The carriage accident. She'd been 15, barely understanding what had happened, only that her father had passed away, helping a nobleman whose coach had overturned on a rain-slicked road. She'd never known which nobleman. Arthur's gaze returned to her, and something flickered in those dark eyes. Recognition, acknowledgement, perhaps even respect. "You've worn mourning long enough, Miss Pablo," he said quietly, meant only for her. "Both for the dead and for futures that were never yours to begin with." Lucas took a step forward. "Now see here, Your Grace, I have every right—" "You have no rights here." Arthur's voice didn't rise, yet Lucas stopped mid-sentence as though he'd struck a wall. "You made your choice before witnesses and God. Accept the consequences." Then Arthur turned fully toward Melissa, blocking Lucas from view entirely, as though the man had ceased to exist. "Will you come with me?" he asked. No explanation. No justification. Just a question that felt like the only one that mattered. Melissa looked at the carriage, then back at the chapel where her humiliation still echoed. She placed her trembling hand in his. The carriage door closed with a soft click, sealing them in leather-scented silence. Melissa sat rigidly across from Arthur, her wedding dress pooling around her like spilled milk, her hands still trembling despite her best efforts to steady them. Arthur settled into his seat with the ease of someone accustomed to commanding spaces, no matter how small. He didn't speak immediately, and somehow that made it worse. The quiet stretched between them, heavy with unasked questions. "Your father," he finally said, his voice low in the confined space, "pulled me from an overturned carriage in the rain. The axle had shattered. I was trapped beneath it, half conscious when he arrived." Melissa's throat tightened. She'd been told so little. Just that her father had passed away helping someone. That it had been quick. "He lifted the wreckage long enough for my driver to pull me free," Arthur continued, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the carriage window. "The effort killed him. An aneurysm, the physician said later. Instant." "I know," Melissa whispered. "Do you know that I've been watching over you since?" His eyes met hers, dark, steady, impossibly serious. "Ensuring your schooling was paid for, that your mother's debts were quietly settled, that you had opportunities even if you never knew their source." The air left her lungs. The anonymous benefactor her mother had thanked God for every Sunday. The scholarship that had appeared from nowhere. The landlord who'd inexplicably forgiven 3 months' rent. "You," she breathed. "A debt unpaid is a wound that festers," Arthur said simply. "I could not restore your father's life, but I could ensure his sacrifice mattered." Melissa's chest constricted with something between gratitude and fury. Then why wait until today? Why let me? Her voice cracked. Why let me stand at that altar thinking I was worth so little that even Lucas Butterfield could discard me? Arthur's jaw tightened. Because Lucas knew. The words hung in the air like smoke. Knew what? That you were connected to me. That your father's death created an obligation I take seriously. Arthur leaned forward slightly, his expression hardening. He learned of it 3 weeks ago through a solicitor's error. He believed marrying you would secure access to my favor, perhaps even my patronage. Melissa's hands clenched in her lap. Then why? Because he also learned you knew nothing of the connection, that you could offer him no leverage. Arthur's voice was cold now, precise. You became worthless to him the moment he realized you couldn't be used. The humiliation crystallized into something sharper, clearer. "I will protect your name," Arthur said quietly. "Society will not be permitted to devour you for his cowardice." Pride warred, with desperation in her chest. She wanted to refuse, to walk away with whatever dignity remained. But dignity didn't pay for food. It didn't shelter her mother. "I accept," she said, the words tasting like survival. The carriage slowed, then stopped. Arthur reached past her to draw back the curtain. Melissa's breath caught. Beyond the window rose Blackmere Estate, grey stone and towering spires, ancient and immovable, vast enough to swallow her entirely. "Welcome home, Miss Pablo," Arthur said. And Melissa understood. Her life had just been rewritten. 3 weeks at Blackmere taught Melissa that survival came in unexpected forms. The estate was a world unto itself. Sprawling gardens, libraries that smelled of leather and time, corridors that whispered with centuries of secrets. The staff treated her with careful deference, as though unsure whether she was guest or something more permanent. Society's reaction arrived in waves. First came the scandalous whispers, vicious and gleeful. The jilted bride, taken in by the reclusive duke. What arrangement could possibly explain it? Then curiosity crept in, tentative and cautious. Invitations began appearing on the entrance hall table, teas, garden parties, music halls, all addressed to Miss Melissa Pablo, guest of His Grace, the Duke of Blackmere. The shield of his name was formidable. Arthur himself remained an enigma. He was polite, maddeningly distant, yet somehow always aware of her presence. He didn't hover or intrude, but she'd catch him watching her across the breakfast table, his expression unreadable behind his newspaper. "The Eastern tenant farms are underperforming," he said one morning, setting down his tea. "What would you suggest?" Melissa blinked, startled. "I'm hardly qualified to—" "You grew up managing a household on limited resources. That requires strategy." His gaze was steady, genuinely interested. "I'm asking your opinion, not your deference." So she gave it. Hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence as he listened. Truly listened, nodding occasionally, asking clarifying questions, treating her thoughts as valuable rather than decorative. It became routine. Estate matters discussed over breakfast, long afternoons in the library where they worked in comfortable silence, Arthur reviewing ledgers while Melissa read, evenings in the drawing room where conversation flowed easily about everything except the obvious question hanging between them. What happens next? She began to see past his cold reputation. Arthur wasn't cruel. He was careful, every decision measured, every word chosen deliberately. His kindness expressed itself in actions rather than sentiments. Books appearing on her nightstand that matched her interests, her mother's cottage discreetly upgraded with new windows, a modiste arriving without explanation to outfit Melissa properly. He noticed everything, said little, missed nothing. One evening, as rain drummed against the windows, Melissa found herself watching him across the chessboard between them. The firelight softened the sharp angles of his face, and for a moment she forgot to guard herself. "You're staring," he said without looking up from the board. "I'm trying to understand you," she admitted. His lips quirked, almost a smile. "Any progress?" "Minimal." "Good." He moved his knight. "Mystery keeps things interesting." The next morning, a letter arrived on silver salver. Melissa recognized the handwriting immediately. Lucas. Arthur stood in the doorway, his expression darkening as he watched her hands tremble around the unopened envelope. "He wants to see you," Arthur said quietly. It wasn't a question. Melissa met his gaze, her heart hammering. "Yes." Lucas Butterfield arrived at Blackmere dressed in his finest coat, though Melissa noticed the fraying at the cuffs, the slightly worn shine of fabric that had seen too many wearings. Arthur had offered them the blue drawing room, neutral territory, yet unmistakably his domain. He stood by the window, present but silent, a reminder that Lucas entered these walls only by permission. "Melissa," Lucas began, his voice softened with practiced contrition, "I've come to explain—" "No need." Her voice surprised her with its steadiness. "You explained quite thoroughly at the altar." He flinched. "It wasn't like that. You must understand the pressure I was under. My mother, society's expectations, your reputation," Melissa finished. "Yes, I understand perfectly now." Lucas took a step closer, his expression pleading. "It was a misunderstanding. I panicked, but I've had time to reflect, to realize what truly matters. My connection to the Duke of Blackmere." The words came out sharper than intended. But Melissa didn't soften them. "That's what matters now, isn't it? Not me, never me, just what association with me might offer you." "That's not fair." "Fair." Something cracked in her chest, but her voice remained level. "You discarded me before God and witnesses because I couldn't elevate you. Now that I stand under a duke's protection, suddenly I'm worth reclaiming." Lucas's jaw tightened. "You're being unreasonable." "She's being clear," Arthur said quietly from the window. "Perhaps that's unfamiliar to you." Lucas turned on him, desperation bleeding into his tone. "Your Grace, surely you understand. A man in my position, my debts are considerable. I need—" "Ah." Arthur moved from the window with lethal grace. "Now we arrive at truth. You don't want Miss Pablo. You want my funds to rescue you from your own mismanagement." The color drained from Lucas's face. "Your gambling debts total approximately £8,000, Arthur continued, his voice conversational, factual. Your estate is mortgaged beyond value. You have perhaps 6 months before creditors force a sale. How did you— I make it my business to know who approaches what is mine to protect. Arthur's gaze was cold iron. Miss Pablo owes you nothing. Not her forgiveness, not her future, and certainly not her rescue of your failures. Lucas looked between them, his composure crumbling. Melissa, please— No. The word came easily now. Final. I choose dignity, Lucas, something you taught me the value of by taking it away. He left without another word. The silence that followed felt like salvation. That evening, Melissa found Arthur in the library, staring into the fire. I never intended to interfere, he said without preamble. I'd watched over you from a distance for years, content with that. But when I heard you were marrying Butterfield— He paused. I told myself it wasn't my place. What changed? She asked softly. He turned, his eyes reflecting firelight. I arrived at the chapel to observe from a distance, to ensure you were happy. His voice dropped. Then I saw your face at that altar, and I couldn't walk away. The fire crackled in the silence. Between them, Melissa stood frozen by the library door, Arthur's words still echoing in her mind. I couldn't walk away. You watched me, she said slowly, trying to understand. For years. Yes. No hesitation, no shame. Why? Arthur turned fully toward her, and for the first time since they'd met, his careful composure cracked. Because you were remarkable, and no one seemed to notice. Not your determination when you tutored children for pennies to help your mother. Not your kindness when you visited the workhouse every Sunday. Not your intelligence when you solved problems others couldn't see. Melissa's breath caught. Those were private moments, small acts she'd thought invisible. I told myself it was duty, Arthur continued, his voice rough, that I was honoring your father's sacrifice by ensuring your welfare, but that was a comfortable lie. He took a step closer. The truth is, I admired you, your resilience, your refusal to become bitter despite every reason to be. Then why stay away? The question came out barely above a whisper. Because I'm a duke, and you are 19 years old with no protection, no family with influence. His jaw tightened. Any attention from me would have been seen as predatory. Would have been predatory, given the power imbalance between us. I refused to become another man who took advantage of your circumstances. Understanding bloomed in her chest, not pity, but recognition. He'd protected her by staying invisible. I convinced myself distance was kindness, Arthur said quietly. That you'd find someone worthy, someone who could offer you a normal life without the weight of obligation or society's scrutiny. His voice dropped. Then you chose Butterfield, and I told myself to let you go. But you didn't. I couldn't. The confession hung between them like a held breath. Not when I saw what he was doing to you. Not when I realized he'd never see what I'd seen from the beginning. Melissa's heart hammered against her ribs. And what was that? That you were never invisible. Not to me. The words struck something deep and tender inside her. Lucas had made her feel like a convenience. Arthur made her feel seen. I won't keep you here out of obligation, Arthur said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. Your father's debt is paid. Your reputation is restored. You're free to leave, to build whatever life you choose. I'll ensure you have the means to do so comfortably. And if I stay? Melissa asked, taking a step toward him. Something flickered in his expression. Hope, fear, want. Then you stay because you choose to. Not because you're grateful, not because you're trapped. Because you want to. Melissa closed the distance between them, her hand finding his. His fingers tightened around hers, warm and solid and real. I choose to stay, she said. 6 weeks after Melissa chose to stay, London society had made up its mind. The reclusive Duke of Blackmere and His mysterious guest were either engaged in a torrid affair or the most peculiar arrangement that Ton had ever witnessed. The whispers followed Melissa through tea rooms and garden parties. Some pitied her, assuming she'd become a kept woman with delusions of grandeur. Others envied her, believing she'd secured the ultimate prize through calculated charm. None of them understood. Arthur found her in the rose garden one afternoon, a book forgotten in her lap as she watched clouds drift across an impossibly blue sky. "Walk with me," he asked. They followed the winding path in comfortable silence, the kind that had become their language over shared mornings and quiet evenings. Eventually, Arthur stopped beside the fountain where stone angels poured eternal water. "I have a question," he said, his tone deceptively casual. Melissa's heart quickened. "Yes? Will you marry me?" No preamble, no grand gesture. Just a question asked in sunlight with no audience to perform for. Melissa turned to face him fully. "Arthur, before you answer, understand what I'm offering." His gaze held hers, steady and sure. Not rescue, not obligation, not even protection, though you'll always have that. He took her hand gently. "I'm offering partnership, equality, a life where your thoughts matter as much as mine, where your voice carries the same weight society would expect." "I don't care what society expects," Arthur interrupted quietly. "I care what you want. If you need time, take it. If you want to refuse, I'll accept it and nothing between us will change. There's no urgency here, Melissa. No pressure. Just a question from a man who has spent years watching you become the most remarkable woman he's ever known." Melissa felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't born of grief this time. Lucas had offered her safety disguised as love. Arthur offered her choice disguised as nothing at all. "I spent my whole life believing love meant making myself small, enough to fit someone else's expectations," she said softly. "That if I was quiet enough, grateful enough, perfect enough, I might be worth keeping." Arthur's thumb brushed across her knuckles. "You are always worth keeping." "I know that now," she smiled through tears. "Because you showed me. Not by rescuing me, but by standing beside me. By seeing me when I thought I was invisible. Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." She laughed, the sound bright and free. "Not because I need you, Arthur. Because I want you, because I choose you, because partnership sounds infinitely better than safety ever did." He kissed her then, gentle, reverent, a promise sealed in sunlight. The announcement appeared in the Morning Post 3 days later. His Grace, the Duke of Blackmare, to wed Miss Melissa Pablo. London society erupted in speculation, scandal, and grudging fascination. Melissa didn't care. She'd finally learned the difference between being chosen and choosing herself. The transformation happened overnight. One day, Melissa was the scandalous guest under the Duke's questionable protection. The next, she was the future Duchess of Blackmare, and suddenly, everyone who'd whispered about her downfall now clamored for her attention. Invitations flooded Blackmare. Tea with Lady Ashford, who'd cut Melissa dead at a musicale 2 months prior. Luncheon with the Dowager Countess of Somerset, who'd loudly speculated about Melissa's arrangements at the opera. Shopping expeditions with women who'd turned their backs when she'd walked past. "They're insufferable," Melissa said one evening, tossing another embossed card onto Arthur's desk. He glanced up from his correspondence, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Welcome to society. They worship power and punish vulnerability. You've simply moved from one category to the other." "It's grotesque." "It is," he agreed. "Accept the invitations that interest you. Decline the rest. You owe them nothing." So she did, and discovered that wielding Arthur's name as her shield felt remarkably satisfying. At Lady Pemberton's garden party, Melissa encountered Lucas's mother. The woman paled, stammered something about misunderstandings, then retreated like a scolded child. Melissa felt no triumph, only a distant sort of pity. Lucas himself had vanished from London entirely. Rumour placed him in Yorkshire, living with a distant cousin, his creditors still circling. Some whispered he'd been seen at gambling hells in Bath, desperate and diminished. Melissa felt nothing when she heard his name. He'd become irrelevant, a footnote in someone else's story. The wedding preparations consumed Blackmere in a way her first engagement never had. This time, there were no compromises, no budget constraints, no mother-in-law dictating fabric choices. "What do you want?" Arthur asked when the modiste presented endless samples. "I want ivory silk," Melissa said, "and orange blossoms, and a small ceremony with people who actually care whether we're happy." Done. It was that simple. Her desires mattered. Her preferences were honored. She wasn't a decoration or an acquisition. She was a partner being celebrated. The night before the wedding, Arthur found her on the terrace overlooking the estate. Moonlight silvered the grounds, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. "Nervous?" he asked, settling beside her. "No." And she meant it. "The first time I was terrified of being rejected. Now," she turned to him, smiling, "now I know exactly what I'm choosing." "And what's that?" "You. Us. A life where I don't have to shrink to fit." He pulled her close, his kiss gentle and sure. "Tomorrow, then." "Tomorrow," she agreed. Dawn broke clear and golden over Blackmere Estate. Inside the chapel, the private one on the grounds, intimate and perfect, guests gathered. But this time, when Melissa walked down the aisle, she wasn't walking toward salvation. She was walking toward choice. "I, Melissa Grace Pablo, take you, Arthur James Ashford." The words came easily this time. No trembling hands, no racing heart born of fear. Just clarity, certainty, and the steady gaze of a man who'd seen her worth before she'd learned to claim it herself. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Arthur kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of restraint finally released. The small gathering of genuine friends, not society ornaments, but people who'd proven their loyalty, erupted in warm applause. Melissa became Duchess of Blackmere in sunlight and certainty, wearing ivory silk and orange blossoms, choosing a future she'd written herself. That night, in chambers prepared with care rather than expectation, Arthur proved that desire rooted in respect looked nothing like obligation. "Are you certain?" he asked, his hands gentle on her face, giving her every opportunity to retreat. "I've never been more certain of anything," Melissa answered. What followed was tender, mutual, achingly slow. Arthur learned her body the way he'd learned her mind, with attention, curiosity, reverence. He asked questions, listened to answers, made her feel cherished rather than conquered. Afterward, wrapped in silk sheets and his arms, Melissa understood what intimacy meant when built on equality. "I love you," Arthur said against her hair, the words simple and devastating. "I know." She smiled against his chest. "You've been showing me for years. I just needed to learn how to see it." The transformation in Arthur surprised no one who truly knew him. The cold, reclusive Duke society feared became openly devoted to his Duchess. He touched her hand at dinners, smiled at her across crowded ballrooms, consulted her publicly on estate matters, making it clear her intellect was valued, not decorative. London society adapted. They always did. 6 months into their marriage, Melissa found herself standing outside St. Catherine's Chapel, the site of her greatest humiliation. She'd come alone, needing to face the ghost of who she'd almost become. The building looked smaller now, less significant, just stone and stained glass, holding no power except what she'd once given it. She remembered standing at that altar, believing Lucas Butterfield's rejection meant she was worthless, that love required earning through perfection, that she needed to be smaller, quieter, less herself to deserve affection. How wrong she'd been. Arthur's carriage pulled up behind her, right on time. He stepped out, somehow knowing she'd be her, somehow understanding she'd needed this moment. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand. Melissa took it, leaving the chapel behind without a backward glance. She'd been denied at that altar by a man who feared her worth, and claimed by one who'd always known it. The difference had rewritten everything. Dear listeners, thank you for staying with us until the end. If this story moved you, please subscribe, like, comment, and share it with someone close to you. Your support inspires us to keep creating stories filled with love, healing, and unforgettable twists.